Hey all, here's the discussion portion of the fifth session of Engaging the Bible in Healthy Ways as Adults. This session was built around 7 tips that I suggested on ways that people can engage the Bible for personal growth, for interpersonal work, for their own personal benefit. And then we have a fantastic discussion. I think you're going to love it. There's 2 parts to this discussion, and they're out of order. The first is the discussion that comes right after the presentation that I did on these 7 ideas. That discussion runs 30 minutes. Then we engage in a conversation from the first week on the Gospels, suggestion of using them as propaganda. And it's a really insightful back and forth conversation that I think you'll find useful in so many ways. In fact, I think this entire discussion is built as much around how we as human beings interact with one another as much as it is built around how we as human beings interact with the Bible. Part of my suggestion was that we engage with the Bible in relational terms, and therefore it is transferable how we interact with one another and how we engage with the Bible. So here it is, the final discussion of the final session, Engaging the Bible in Healthy Ways as Adults, Personal Inspiration Edition. Okay, thoughts, comments on any of that? 7 tips to a more personally fulfilled life with the Bible.
I liked the quote about not being afraid of things, and it reminded me of this favorite quote of mine from Marie Curie. Nothing in this world is to be feared, it is only to be understood. First, she died of radiation poisoning, so that's kind of ironic. But
She probably should have feared that a little.
a badass person, and she just didn't understand it yet because she helped us understand it with her work. So.
We fear that which we do not understand, but the path from non-understanding to understanding always involves a confrontation of something that's beyond yourself, which is something you cannot control and therefore induces fear. Okay, and it sometimes is the case that before you understand something, you do not even have the hardware to understand it, or the categories or whatever, and you have to go through some struggle or risk through which you grow, as a person.
And understanding doesn't equal control.
That is true, yes.
And there are also so many, and I can get stuck in that, trying to understand something because I really want to control it, and so I think.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. So,
But
so if you're trying to understand the Bible or a certain book of the Bible in order to argue with someone you just really don't like, you don't have an attitude of curiosity, or you don't have an attitude of curiosity, and so you may not understand it because that creative drive isn't there.
That's a great way to approach the Bible, an attitude of curiosity. Rather than I have to make my life fit these seemingly random texts.
I like that. Well, I like that because it also it leaves room for a progressively deepening relationship over a lifetime. I was talking about how you never really fully know or understand someone, but the fun is the journey. My favorite movie, almost every time I watch it, I find just this whole new frame or lens of understanding it, just this new layer of magic underneath that if we let go of the need to totally and completely understand, which we never can anyway, anything, we can't understand the full spectrum of light that we're looking at. Then it leaves room for a much richer journey.
So that's one of the interesting things I think about the Bible, that the Bible wants to advocate that people become deeper in faith. And there's 2 ways that can be taken, right? The phrase faith, and I'll say a few things about it. One is deeper in a set of beliefs or of a particular faith. And the other is that people become more capacitated in faith. They become more faith able. And if you were to approach the Bible, a lot of the Bible stories, and read them through the narrative of This is advocating for people to expand their capacity to their current capacity of faith, to widen that a little or to deepen it or whatever metaphor you want to pick, that they become more faith engaged, because we all are anyway. And I don't mean that means you have a belief in the supernatural, right? So that was parenthetical for my atheist friends who I know listen to this thing, right? By faith, I don't mean believing in things that are impossible. I mean the act of trust and belief and leaning into something that you don't know where it's going to go and what it's going to be. That action and the mysterious nature of something that is unknowable, as everything is fundamentally unknowable. Getting better at that takes action and work and practice and love and safety. It takes a whole lot of things to get someone to be more faith capable and more faith able. And I think that's one of the things the Bible is really advocating for. And I can see why some people would resist that, that they want it to be a different narrative. But I think it is about the human capacity of faith abling.
Can I speak
Yeah,
into that?
please.
So you use the word unknowable. So if I understand you correctly, one way to reword what you just said is to be able to live with the unknowable. Whereas to not have faith is I just have to know everything all the time to make sure everything's knowable. I have to prepare against surprise, so nothing's ever going to surprise me.
You're saying the expression of faith is to posture yourself as not being able to be surprised.
Right.
I used a lot of double negatives there.
Right. No, you did. Yeah. So I use the word surprise.
Yeah.
In that also.
Yeah.
But the key word that you used that I'm kind of putting everything that you said under is unknowable.
Yes.
And so to be able to live with the unknowable, that there is unknowableness, and I can live with that. So I have faith.
Yeah.
As opposed to like I'm going to train my whole life to like never be surprised about anything.
Right.
Therefore, I know everything, so so I'll never be caught off guard.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I think like fundamentalism oftentimes is almost like the direct opposite of faith.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
it is seeking to, I would say, even the most strident, strict fundamentalist would certainly has an anxiety, maybe unconsciously has an anxiety of the unknown, knowing that there is an unknowable. Yet what they're doing in their fundamentalist faith, if you will, is that they're protecting themselves from making that conscious.
Or they're less honest about the anxiety, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. And
Not to
so
be
fundamentalism is a way for them to continue to push and block that down. And I really do think that is in direct opposition to what faith ought to be.
Yeah.
That makes sense. You sort of taking as much unknowable out of the equation as possible.
So to step that point one level further, the degree to which any of us become fundamentalists, right? So is the point at which we say, well, sure, there are unknowable things, but the things that I know are the things that are more important. You think about what any of us do when we become fundamentalists, especially religious fundamentalists, is we say, these are the things that really matter. In other words, they're the fundamentals. They are that on which everything else rests, right? So these are more important. So the argument is not about knowable or unknowable. I've been in lots of conversations with fundamentalists. They'll say, no, I grant there's lots of things unknowable because for many reasons. But the important things, the crucial ones, the things that really, really matter, those we know, and that's this. So can't you grant that? And then they will have a set of particular fundamentals which often correspond to the things that they have a high level of confidence in. So we all tend to do that. And what happens to us in any crisis of a faith, whether it's a crisis of religious faith or faith in a person or faith in your government or faith in your family, faith in yourself, is when something you've determined, you've put in the category of a fundamental, more important than all the other things, fails you. When that happens, a crisis starts. So it's not really a crisis of faith, it's a crisis of knowing.
So, to speak to that, if you, I don't know if you meant, do you mean there's like a definition of fundamentalism, like the important things that are the things that we know, these things we know are important. So if the important things to know are the things that you know, you know, so you have these categories, the things you don't know, the unknowable even, or the things you don't know, and the things you know. But the things you do, but if the things you know are important, the important things, that's an excuse to not learn. And if I remember correctly, your
Totally.
what was it, your fifth point? That it has to be something you can always learn from. The Bible is always learn from.
Yeah.
So if you're a fundamentalist, and you cut yourself off from learning because you have this great excuse, you know the things that are important, then you may have divorced yourself from an aspect of the Bible, potentially, at least.
Yeah, curiosity would have been the right word for number 5, which I phrased as something like, you know that there's always something new you can learn from. Approach it with a sense of curiosity. And curiosity not in the you are curious, but that the Bible or a person in your life is, you have to approach them with curiosity because they're more interesting than what your current set of categories allow you to know. I mean, this is the thing about interpersonal relationships. If you can assume that another person is far more interesting and beneficial to you than you have the capacity currently to know, so you have to expand your capacity to experience what they have to offer, that's really different than if you were more interesting, I would probably find you interesting. Now, sometimes we hide ourselves, just to do some interpersonal work. A lot of times we hide ourselves, so we don't offer ourselves as very interesting to another person. We're covering up a lot of that stuff, and we just let it all kind of go by, but there's a lot of internal work going on. So interpersonally, we have to work on offering ourselves to another person to be discovered. It's almost like on a Bluetooth device when you have to push on the device to be put in discoverable mode. And then something else is, so a lot of us hide ourselves to not be very discoverable, and we only play the part. So it's just helpful for us to all become more discoverable. The Bible, also, we have to do things to allow the Bible to become more discoverable. And a lot of people are in churches that prevent the Bible from ever being discoverable.
I think that connects to power and vulnerability, both individually and to the Bible, because I know sometimes when I am not making myself discoverable, it's because I feel that what I'm going through and who I am at that moment is like not powerful, or so I'm like, nope, you don't get to see that.
Yes.
Here comes my little mask. Whereas like the most interesting part, maybe the Bible is vulnerable.
Yeah.
It has flaws or holes or whatever, and we can engage with it.
Yeah, like if one sees himself as a flickering candle that's burning out, you'd want to sort of cocoon it and hide it and protect it, so you don't get. And a lot of people feel that way in their lives, right? They feel like, oh my gosh, I'm about to go out here. I really have to.
Self-preservation.
Self-preservation. Yeah.
Like shame or pride or like just a mistaken view of what humanity has to be and like what's acceptable.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's totally fair. I mean, I think there are a lot of things in the Bible that could potentially really hurt, say, if you were to fully engage with without being rooted in yourself and aware of your own okayness and your own fragility. If you were to engage with them in a way that was totally open, that could hurt you, that could blow your candle out. So you have to be able to come from a place of awareness of your own needs and your own okayness. Like when another girl came before and she was talking about how she was feeling really fragile about even engaging with the Bible, and I was thinking she was really brave to be here, but I could see how it might not be the right time to engage with it, and there might not be times that are okay, or even with people. There are people who you just need to totally stay away from, or people whose parts of their lives are
Just quickly,
No,
it saved
but-
my faith to disengage with the Bible because I
Mhm.
knew that God was real for me and the community like this was real for me, but the Bible was too weird and at odds with these truths. So I have kind of been like,
And if I can
Yeah.
comment on
Yeah.
that exact same thing, while I agree with which everything you've been saying, to the extent that I can think about it, the more discoverable we want to make the Bible, it's almost to some level competes with our discovery of God sometimes.
Yeah.
It's kind of what happens in fundamentalism.
Mm-hmm.
totally.
Now you box God, which is so much bigger in a relationship with God, into this limited thing,
And
in
stopped
comparison.
engaging.
Right.
Stopped engaging with life
Right.
in the first century.
Something
Which is insane.
that I was thinking about, because we were talking about definitions of faith, and I had this memory come up, and it may or may not be useful. I'm wondering if the two merge, and I'll throw it out there and see what y'all think. At the end of my relationship with my ex-fiance, I was having experiences, and I realized that I'd been with the person who I trusted to never hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that a much fuller way of being in a relationship would be to be with someone who I trusted to hurt me, someone who I knew might hurt me and probably would, but but that it would be okay, that
Yeah.
there would still be this fundamental level of okayness and this deeper intimacy to it, and that would be sort of a deepening capacity to grow in love. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's some sort of parallel with deepening of faith there. I'm not quite grabbing it, but I feel like there's something.
Yeah, I think you're onto the idea that for help as people develop in maturity. So as people mature and become more mature people, they begin to realize the thing that they wanted to prevent is something that they now can experience and tolerate. So if someone enters into, say, love in a way that they say, I don't want to fall in love because I never want to fall out of love, or I never want love to break my heart. That's a kind of young, pure love that people cheer on. Like literally at weddings, people stand up and cheer and throw rice and bubbles at people who are in a sense of saying, like, you're the only one I could ever love in the world. And that's a good developmental stage. Later on in that relationship, someone starts to say, I now see that I could love someone else, and now I have a decision to make. Right? That's a different thing, and it's true for a person now at that level of life than at another, right? And so there's a lot of decisions that end up being made at that case. And if someone sees the Bible or any kind of spirituality, I mean, here's the funny thing: you take Bible in all this conversation and insert any kind of spiritually oriented artifact in there, church, faith, community, pastor, hero, whatever you put in that category, it works. All this stuff works with that, right? Once one realizes, wow, I really do have to figure out how to be that I am fundamentally vulnerable. That love is not guaranteed. That safety is not guaranteed. It has to be nurtured and cared for and protected. And the Bible might do you wrong sometimes. That's a level of personal maturity to get to. And not everyone can get there. So people are at really different levels. So if you're in a group of people, or especially a church, this is why churches are, in one sense, a really bad mechanism for talking about the Bible. Because people are at all kinds of levels. Yeah, I mean, both age developmentally and emotionally development, they're at really different levels. And somebody's at the point where they're like, look, love is not guaranteed, man. It'll break your heart. It'll take you and throw you. It'll, like every country western song you've ever heard, it will do that to you. It is just true. It's gonna break you. And somebody else is like, I just met him. Like, I'm in love. Like, I'm starry-eyed. Like, why are you people so dark-hearted around here? You run into, I watch people around here at Solomon's Porch, we'll talk about this all the time. Somebody will come in and they'll like say, wow, I'm really interested in this place. Like, it's full of people who want to think about faith and the Bible and Christianity in totally new ways. And they say that to somebody who then says to them, yeah, I kind of used to think that when I came here like 15 years ago, and I'm sort of, yeah, I'd be more post-faith than anything, right? And they kind of, and this person, I watched them like standing right in these areas, they'll just be like, what? Because it's complicated, right? And that's where that person is, and maybe you're going to be there someday, and someday they might be back to where you are. Like, it's this washing machine of flow that's going on. People are all over the place, and so people's relationship to the Bible is really complicated. And not to make the seventh point again, but that's why sharing it with others, or what you think about it, or how you talk about it, is really helpful, because it lets you let it out, and that lets somebody else let it in. Like it. So I think I pivoted like 4 times off of what you said there, but.
But I did want to ask
Please,
about
yeah.
the thing that I talked about on the break, was how does that 7-point go, how do you put it together with the, if it's the truth, you don't need to be afraid of it piece? Because it sounds like you're kind of advocating for, for propagandizing, like we were talking about, for good or ill, to yourself and to others. Does that get in the way of feeling your own inner truth? I actually had an argument with someone online a few months ago, because I was talking about how I feel like personal growth is just like a process of opening more and more and more deeply into your own truth. Sometimes I feel that way.
Yeah.
And being brave enough to do that. But then, and he was like, well, there really is no truth. And I said, well, there's my truth kind of is the same as the truth, just as your truth, even if it's different from my truth, is also in a way the truth, and it can't be ignored. So how do you make those two things work together or understand them?
The ability for any of us to develop the capacity to share something important to us in and with honesty with another person, and not having the response of the other person be the outcome or to dictate how we feel about the truth that we hold or that we're sharing, the thing we're sharing. That's, like, when that happens, you pat yourself on the back and buy yourself whatever cheery drink you get to drink. You think, I did that thing. I shared my life. I said my thing. The fact that other people responded to it did not influence how I felt. Like that was a kind of mutuality of sharing and honesty that didn't become codependent but was somehow independent and interdependent. That was a win. Okay, so that happens on occasion, and the more that happens, it gets better, right? Because there's a lot of us who are just like kind of cold-hearted people, and I'd put myself in this category of like, I just honestly don't care what somebody else thinks. Like, if I say what I think, and they say, oh, that's not what, then I say like, oh, okay, right? That is not interdependent. That is just full-on independent. I don't care what you think, right? Right, and that's
good for you.
So yeah, it's not good for me. I get that. Like it's
You said anything in the first place.
sometimes people who find a sense of personal strength and can share what they're sharing really care what someone else thinks, but that caring doesn't allow it to land back on them to change them. But they really do care what somebody else thinks, because now they're in an act of empathy and they're not in an act of codependence. That can look to someone like they don't care, but they know that they do care. That's that difference, that I can share the thing that matters to me, and then another person can share their response to that, and you can care about their response without letting it jump the fence into changing you. That's the thing you want. What you don't want is this kind of just one-way attack that my temperament would do so easily, which is, I'm going to share what I think, and frankly, I don't give a shit, right? That's just the other side of the coin to, I'm going to share my thing, and please believe me, please hear me, because if you don't hear me, then I don't think that what I'm holding is true for me. And you become now panicky about the other person. Those are the same thing. Those are just two sides of the paddle in a canoeing episode, in my view. So you don't want either of those. You want this kind of safe space where you can share, somebody else can say, and you're like, yes. Now, I'm not undoing my thing, but that's something else for you. That's a really different kind of space. So I think that's what I would say about that you don't have to be afraid of the truth, and you can share your own. Because if you hold it, and then you can share it. And if somebody else comes back with something else where you're like, oh, well, there is that. Now you have to make a choice about what you do with the truth.
It's like riding the line between antisocial behavior, right? And just normal assertiveness. But I have been in a dysfunctional enmeshed family relationship, and it was either sometimes it would be F you, I don't.
Yep.
And then somebody would be I need you to
Yep.
feel that I need to convince you that I've experienced those two sides.
Yeah.
Actually, in one relationship, so that makes a lot of sense. And I really like how we're talking about the Bible in terms of a long-term partner. Makes a lot of sense. It can give furniture to you, and you can cease to be curious about it or think I've got that figured out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's really beautiful and helpful.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that health is kind of a theme in these discussions, right? Because how do we a healthy way?
Like in the title.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, a healthy way to engage in the Bible is through which we can personally and interpersonally grow.
Yep.
But I mean, okay, so to be very two-dimensional and non-sexy, hermeneutics, the interpretation of texts and interpretation of people or anything really, but it involves, especially texts actually, involves a type of differentiation.
Yeah.
It's a process of differentiating yourself from others. But if you're in a religious community, if you wanted to be in a healthy religious community, then you need to attend to that differentiation process with other people. And you put God in the mix, and there's a lot of differentiation going on, right? So that always strikes me as interesting, as healthy ways to relate to the Bible, relate to others. How do we differentiate myself from that of the Bible, the biblical authors? How do I differentiate myself from my neighbor? And it's an interesting constant.
Mm-hmm. Can I riff on that for a second? Because I think I wish I had said this, because you've reminded me and showed me that this is something I've thought about for a long time. The Bible is actually the easiest relationship, if someone takes the Bible seriously, the easiest relationship in your life to learn how to do this with, because it is more single-dimensional than the others. It's sort of the training wheels of learning to ride a bike.
Do you mean because it's a text and it
Yes.
doesn't wrestle with that?
Fundamentally,
Yeah.
because it is a text that truthfully the words don't change. Now, the depth, but compared to, like you're saying, other relationships or your sense with God, and I see God as an ever-changing being as well, right? But so the idea that you could practice this in the confines in which the level of change is more limited, the Bible's actually a good place to practice. Strangely, some people think the Bible is more complicated than their interpersonal relationships, which is partly why I like to use interpersonal relationships as the means by which you engage with the Bible. Because if we're better at it than we think we are, we just don't know that we can apply those skills to the Bible. So if we take the skills that we have in a friend or a coworker or a family member and apply that to the Bible, we're much better at it than we ever thought that we would be, and we can actually use it as a training ground.
So I don't want to completely agree with that.
No, that's okay. You don't. Yeah.
But I would like to hypothetically right now agree with that in the sense that, to entertain it, to make the point that I do think the Bible is meant to confront other narratives. So maybe the First Testament was to confront narratives of trial and how do I maintain my faith.
Mm-hmm.
And that the Second Testament is to confront narratives of how can I have a faith in a globalized, expanding world where there's all these different narratives to wrestle with, type of thing. So I think that the Bible is written, if you use the word propaganda or whatever, to confront narratives. But if you're in a community that, to have a community and to live life in reality, you have to know what it's like to have a narrative to be confronted with.
Yeah.
And a narrative, and so, but because the Bible is just a text, and there's no one there with another life story to shove it in your face,
Right.
a particular way, it may not confront your narrative the way that, maybe even the way it was meant
That's
to.
right. It fights back a little less than the other people in your community.
Yeah,
It pushes
yeah.
back a little
Yeah,
less.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where what you just said resonates with me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, as I promised, we're not done quite yet. Here's 15 more minutes from our discussion at the start of this session where I asked for a recap on what people have been thinking about over the last few weeks. And we have this lovely and I think really insightful discussion about the use of language and especially the description of the Gospels as propaganda. I think it's helpful for thinking about the Bible, but just other areas of life as well. So, one last little nibble of engaging the Bible in healthy ways as adults discussion. All right, everyone. Well, this is week 5 of engaging the Bible in healthy ways as adults. I don't know, I guess we'll decide after this if we think anything similar should go on. I've so much enjoyed this. Thank you to all of you who've been willing to come back week after week. It's been really great. I'd like to take a few minutes at the start and let anyone respond to anything you've been thinking about from last week or from the previous weeks. Very often, people who are long-term processors, or sometimes called introverts, people feel this way, or other people who like to think about things for a while before they express an opinion. I don't think much of that tact of life, but some people take that as a really important feature in their lives. Like to need a little bit of time before they can respond, and very often you're in a group like this, and it just takes off without you, and you've just started thinking about something from last week or a couple of weeks ago, and it's now at a place where you have a thought or a comment or a reflection on it. So maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But anything at all? Any comments you have or thoughts or comments about the last few weeks?
I can't remember if it was here or if it was in Sunday morning where you were talking about like punishment and God is at Easter time and all that. Were we talking about that on Sunday nights? Not so much. No.
Maybe a little bit in one of that, like that second week, a little bit with Paul not being someone who's into punishment narratives. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I
But-
was here for the second week. I feel like I missed 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I
I
don't
think I
know.
was here for the second one. Anyway, I that really resonates with me because I think and I maybe mentioned this before, but as a small child, I watched The Greatest Story Ever Told, which most of you probably never have heard about, but it was a really big thing at the time. It's the story of the life.
Heston?
No, he wasn't in that.
What is it called?
No, but
Greatest
John
Story
Wayne
Ever?
was in it.
John Wayne.
Down
was
with-
on
Yep.
The Greatest Story Ever Told. It's
Oh.
about the Bible.
Oh, okay.
But I was like 6, and I went with my grandma and my older sister,
To the
and
movies, wow.
there was a part about Jesus' life, and they were killing the innocents, the children, and I spent like half an hour throwing up in the bathroom, and all of that, and so ever since I can't handle like violence in movies or all of this, and then at Easter time or Good Friday we had a big production, where the kids choir was singing and stuff. But you walk into this theater setting, and there was this big, screen, and there was Jesus hanging on the cross, and I'm just kind of freaked out by that whole narrative and just the violence and all of the, some of the hymns that seem to almost glorify the blood and all that. And I get the part about sacrifice and stuff, but like what you've been talking about how to, that's not the way that, there's an alternate story or something like that you talk about.
I think that Christianity is meant,
Yeah.
the Jesus story is meant to be an alternative to that
An
narrative.
alternative to that. I mean, that happened, yes, but that's not the way we should.
It wants to say that that was a failure, that thing that just happened there.
Yeah, so we shouldn't continue to like glorify guns and violence and stuff and punishment. But that's not the narrative we should choose
Yeah.
to live by. So, and I think
And that's what I would suggest, and that's what the Bible tells that story as a way to say that there's an alternative to this.
right.
Not, the Bible doesn't tell that story as a way to say, and this is a good thing.
Yeah.
So not just that I would like or I think we shouldn't live into that story. I think that's the reason the irony is, the reason it's told is to leave it behind.
Right, but there's
It's ironic.
the way you've described that just made me think. That's something I've been thinking. I think my whole life, but I haven't heard it articulated that way. It's like, oh, I can still be a Christian and not think that this death is something that God caused or needed to do to punish someone because of all of the evil that we do or something. So.
Yeah. Thanks, Susie.
Yeah, you were going to say something, I think, as an introvert.
Oh,
Process.
yeah, I mean, every week I think about mentioning it, but it's such a small thing that it's like, why mention it, but the whole propaganda thing on the Gospels, which I get, and I have no problem with using that term, it makes sense, it's a good term. I just think in broadcasting this to others, it might send up red flags.
Sure.
And maybe it's meant to do that, I don't know, or meant to get a response. Because I am so careful myself
Yeah.
in not using words like that. And as an English lit major, I mean, we had all this terminology, which when I started using that, like at church, I got into trouble, whether it was a myth, what,
Yeah.
And I've just been aware of that my whole life. And depending on the crowd that I speak in, it's like, okay, I couch my words carefully, and it's sometimes safer to just shut up and not say anything. But so that's what I was thinking, and yeah, and that's about it.
I've toyed. It's true. I mean, I do when I suggest that the Gospels, especially, were written with an agenda that wants the hearer or reader to end up with a conclusion that they are advocating for. I call that propaganda.
And that's a great term for it.
It-
It's
and
just that it has
Yeah.
It's loaded
nuance
language.
in-
It's very loaded because of its use in the Trump administration's willingness to destroy this country from its very core. Or maybe you meant something else. I don't know. Another phrase that I've tried to use in that midst is, which is even more harsh to some people, would be marketing language or branding language, right? Because marketing essentially wants you to conclude something based on the information that they're giving you. So they're giving you information in order to present something in a certain light for you to hold something with a certain opinion. We call that marketing. And I'm not sure in our some days I feel like marketing would be a better phrase to use for that, for what the Gospels do, than propaganda. But propaganda feels like it's a little more kind of technical, and therefore I don't know something
Would
like
you
that.
perhaps say persuasive?
Persuasive could be
as
another
a
one.
Material, or a hard sell. I don't. What else would you say? Some sort
Yeah,
of
hard sell. That's a
campaign.
nice word, because I want it to have the sense that the conveyor of the idea, so the gospel writers, whoever that is, has in mind that they want something to happen as a result of you hearing this information. There's an agenda built in to the reason they're telling this to you.
Which
And not
matches
completely
a
accurate,
persuasive
right? When you
message.
use those kinds of terms,
So-
when you say words like propaganda, marketing, I mean, I'm hearing you say that it's a little embellished or a little not as accurate, a little subjective. Would that be fair? Is that kind of what you're communicating when you say those things?
I think with propaganda, I think that internally, I tend to use the word propaganda in any other setting as if there's an act of deceit
Right.
inside of the
Right.
intention.
I didn't want to use that word, but
Yeah, that's how I tend to
Right.
think about it. So I've tried, in that session we did on that, which was session 2, I've tried to suggest that there's a kind of propaganda that's not necessarily deceitful, but it's chosen what's being shared. It's intentional curating and selecting to make a particular point. Whatever that is called is probably a better word than propaganda. One of the nice things as a rhetorical device to use propaganda is that it doesn't have to mean deceitful. It just normally does in its function. So it causes people to have to step back and think about it at a deeper level than they might a persuasive, if you call it persuasive speech or marketing language or something. It's a little more dangerous if you don't get it just right. So it heightens the senses a little bit for someone to respond to that idea.
And yeah, I think that's what you're saying, though, right?
Yes.
It is somewhat subjective and embellished and
But
perhaps
not-
a little deceitful.
But not deceitful. So I don't
No.
suggest that it's deceitful, because I think deceitfulness is the intent to keep something from someone or to falsely inform someone so that they would make a decision that they wouldn't make if they knew that information or didn't know this thing. And I don't think that's what the gospel writers are doing. I think when John or Luke say, I've selected these pieces in order for this outcome, they believe it's the cleanest way to get to the outcome. It's more of the work of an editor to try to clarify for impact than it is to deceive.
So I think it's so funny because this is really timely because I just had a long conversation with a client about this exact thing yesterday. But yeah, we were talking about branding, and I think of branding as aesthetic and thematic cohesion. It's like when you create a film, how a good film, every single element of that film is in service, and acting style, the mise en scène is in service of what you were trying to convey. The message, the feel of it, the emotional feel, the information, it all is a complete package. But if you think of it like, what's that app that uses the artificial intelligence to take pictures and create like a photo that you have and do it in like the painting style of Dali or like all those different painters or Lichtenstein or whatever. You can look at that as branding. It's all like accurate information. It's just what's highlighted, what's in shadow, what are the nuances that are brought out, what are the emotions that you're trying to convey, what is it that is viewed as like the most important information in this picture, and what are you trying to pull out of people? Because words are so nuanced, and you could have 20 different sentences that all give the exact same truthful information, but are trying to elicit totally different responses from people, just based on English is great for this. English is such a nuanced language, but so many different words for things. So it's not necessarily deceitful. It's just about what are you trying to pull out of people.
Yeah, and I think that's super helpful, because the reason I bring that up at all about the Gospels is and was, in the time we talked about it, in contrast to this is objective, absolute truths that are told to you in a container in which, in a format that is unlike anything else, and therefore is given a kind of authority and power as an inarguable, infallible, communicated truth. So it plays by a different set of rules. So by suggesting, no, it's more like this, whatever we call this, propaganda, persuasive speech, whatever, then it pulls it out of that mythical realm that theologians have put it in and church people have put it in, into something where it empowers you as the hearer or listener to say, well, okay, am I with this or not with this? Like, it pulls you into the arena as opposed to calling it some sort of an objective authority. So part of for my use of it is in the contrast between the way a lot of people think about something being, quote, the gospel truth versus propaganda. And we use the gospel truth as if it means, the most true of true things. That's the popular use of the phrase, it's the gospel truth. They don't mean it's the good news truth, right? They mean it's
inarguable truth.
They mean it's the most powerful. So it's that contrast that I think really matters around the Bible, anyway, for Bible conversations.
I was just going to say that, to my knowledge, sometimes, or maybe usually, propaganda connotates in an authority, you know, like this is a government, and we're in power, and this is the truth, and even brainwashing. You
Yeah.
know? So it may not be the greatest.
Like, we know, you don't know, and we're going to tell you what we want you to know.
Yeah, and you only have this set of knowledge, and so there's sort of an unfortunate. I like it as playfully like used, but in reality, like you think of the Cold War, you think of
Yeah,
you know not
especially people my age.
helpful.
People that like their Russian.
Perhaps the opposite of what you may want.
They play with that word really interestingly, though, in the Hunger Games books. I was just talking to, I can't remember who it was, somebody here last week about, I love the Hunger Games books. I think I was telling you about this at some point, because they're really teaching kids media literacy without them realizing it.
You were telling me.
Yeah, like it's so much of
Interesting.
those books, especially, I think, like one of the heroes is the stylist. The third one is really, they call them like propos. They're shooting propos, and they have the documentary person in there, it's all about, okay, how are we and the heroine Katniss, she's shooting propaganda, and it's like, okay, well, how do we do this? How do we convey our message? How do we, get people on board with our resistance we're trying to get them on board with? How do we, show her as a hero? How do we, portray her in the way that we want to portray her? And they call them propaganda, but it's used for good instead of
You
evil there.
have to cut through the clutter of other propaganda by playing their game in a way.
Not just their game, but to have a clear message.
Sure.
Like have something that can be conveyed without having to relying on time and ability of people to go really deep into intellectual details and sort through, but to have a clear, cohesive, simple message that strikes people in the gut.
Nice.
So-
Okay, well, so I'm going to transition us from that conversation into the